wastelands of Fallout are soaked in the old world's mistakes, but for all pre-war America's failings, they aren't to blame. America did not nuke themselves, or their allies, according to Tim Kaine, one of the co-creators of the franchise. The Chinese are responsible for the nuclear Armageddon, which snuffed out humanity's little light.
The reason we got nuked is bioweapons were illegal, and somehow China found out we were doing FEV, and they're like, you have to stop it. And we went, okay. And all we did is move it.
But just how many nuclear missiles were fired anyway? There are no official numbers on the matter. 77 nuclear missiles targeted Las Vegas alone, America's 24th most populous city. So, we're going to have to do some math based on what unclassified information we can acquire. By the 21st century, globally recognized treaties have taken place to reduce the number of nuclear missiles. Despite this, there are still 12,241 nuclear warheads on standby for use across the globe. Remember, these are the numbers the general public are allowed to know. The Great War, as you may well know, happens in 2077. That's a further 52 years of nuclear armament construction in a world of increasingly desperate, resource-deprived nations. To make matters worse, there is no evidence of nuclear disarmament treaties for the world of Fallout. Instead, there has been purposeful military escalation between the world powers, especially between China and America. No one is safe. The timeline of Fallout diverges sometime shortly after World War II, though the exact moment of divergence has been purposefully left vague. In your timeline, the peak number of nuclear missiles was around 70,000 in the mid-1980s, mostly held by America and the Soviet Union. The drop-off in nuclear weapon production after this date is primarily attributed to global treaties, which exist to purposefully curb producing such weapons. The Cold War between America and Soviet Russia was more like the cold shoulder, with the two nations eventually developing roughly cordial relations. Although each country continues to mass-produce nuclear weapons in response to each other, the competition between them is so minimal that the Soviet Union manages to persist into the 21st century. Although the conflict in Fallout centers around China and America, it should be noted that there's no evidence of the Russians reducing their own nuclear arsenal. Furthermore, without a single treaty anywhere to reduce production efforts, and with China entering the nuclear proliferation game, it is likely that by 2077, each of these three nations possess several 100,000 nuclear missiles each. Worse still, America, China, and Russia aren't the only nuclear powers by 2077. By 2006, the United Kingdom, France, India, Israel, Pakistan, and North Korea also possess a variety of nuclear missiles. Other countries like Italy and Germany do not own their nuclear weapons, but instead host American nuclear weapons. In the Fallout timeline, this trend is likely to be expanded upon further, with a growing number of European countries hosting American nuclear weapons to keep Russian and Chinese communism or any other threats at bay. Between now and 2077, in a world of increasing hostility, larger and wealthier European countries are most likely to start their own nuclear weapons programs, with the technology and infrastructure likely purchased from the Americans, just as China did with the Soviets. But what do we know for certain? In 2051, America invades Mexico for resources, yet with no mention of nukes being fired. Global tensions increase further in 2052 with the resource wars in Europe. Smaller nations go bankrupt as a result, lending to the United Nations disbanding. Even if there were nuclear arms treaties, the body which would have enforced them no longer exists. In 2053, a terrorist uses a nuclear device to wipe out Tel Aviv. In 2054, limited nuclear exchanges in the Middle East builds fear of a global nuclear war. In 2060, the resource wars between the Middle East and Europe finally end, only for a European civil war to erupt immediately after, with the Middle East presumed to be somewhat irradiated and emptied of oil. In 2066, China invades Alaska to seize its oil reserves, triggering the Sino-American War. China fails to defeat America and is counter-invaded by 2074. China's defense ultimately collapses by 2076 thanks to the T-51B power arm, with the only nuclear weapons being used against the Chinese being mini-nuke catapults developed at Fort Strong. Despite this, China continues to fight right up until the Great War in 2077. As we can see, global hostilities only ever increased. But how does this help us understand how large global nuclear stockpiles really are? It is easy to see that global nuclear stockpiles would only ever increase as global tensions and fears of nuclear reprisal increase, especially as nuclear-armed nations militarize. Any nation lacking in nuclear weapons will rush to acquire their own as a form of threat response to escalating armed conflicts across the globe. Remember, the global supply around 90 years ago was around 70,000, mostly held by 2 nations, stunted by pre-automation manufacturing, now unconstrained by no possibility of disarmament treaties. 9 nations gained nuclear arsenals by 2006. How many more will arm themselves over the course of the next 71 years? To theory craft, if we assume a highly conservative annual growth rate of just 2%, starting in 1986, with around 70,000 nukes globally, there is an increase of 1,400 nukes in just the first year. By 2077, this would result in a global supply of 371,770 nukes. The true number is definitely much higher than this, as we fail to account for automation and superior manufacturing technology. But at least it's a start. Without access to highly classified information, we can't guess the possible proliferation percentage per annum per country and extrapolate upon that for the Fallout universe. No one is going to war thunder themselves for a game like this one. All we can know for absolute certain is that in the Fallout universe, the global nuclear arsenal would be demonstrably larger by 2025 and unimaginably large by 2077. Each nation is desperate to be a cut above the rest, to give their enemies a nuclear makeover that can't be undone. With each newly constructed nuclear missile escalating the proliferation. In summary, by the time of 2077, it is likely that there are over 100,000 nuclear missiles in America alone. Let alone Russia, Europe, the Middle East, or of course, China. War. War never changes.